everyone, Anthony Ramos here. Netflix new series, Say I Do, follows couples on their path to surprise dream weddings, of course, guided by three talented and fabulous experts. In the first episode, Chef Gabriele Bertaccini opened up about being HIV positive, and I'm so excited to talk to him right now. Gabriele, how are you?
Anthony, I'm doing very well, thank you. You look fantastic.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate it. So do you. So let's talk about this episode. You know, in the very first episode, you know, things got very personal for you, and you know, take me back to that moment. So just, you know, I think now that the world is starting to see this show, I think I look back on that moment. I would just like for you to tell me what it was like, because, you know, a stranger.
Of course. Well, first of all, I want everybody to know that that was not scripted whatsoever. You know, everything that has happened on the show and everybody sees in the episodes came very naturally. And probably the viewers are surprised for me to kind of open up about my HIV status while I'm cooking as much as I was at the time. You know, listen, the show, I always say the show, it's about, you know, love, vulnerability, resiliency and hope. And, you know, those are all words that really resonate with me when it came down to get my HIV diagnosed, right, years ago. And at that moment, it felt extremely natural with Marcus because he actually opened up about some health issues that he was going through. And as everybody can see, it was a very, it was a very emotional moment. And for a second, you actually can see in my eyes, I probably thought a little bit too hard whether sharing what I really felt I needed to share at the moment. And I didn't want to let fear take over. And it felt so natural to actually answer Marcus back with Gabriel that is vulnerable, a Gabriel that it's you know, not fearful about being judged or about, you know, shame, but actually open and honest about how many things we have in common, regardless of, you know, how we look or what we think we went through. We have so much more in common than our differences. And that was a moment that kind of exemplified that.
Yeah, and it was a really beautiful moment because, you know, with Marcus specifically, you know, his reaction was very warm, it came from a place of acceptance. I think he really appreciated you opening up. I mean, you know, it's like you never know what someone's reaction is going to be, but how happy were you to kind of have that kind of support from him to kind of just, you know, that he, you know, really was really receptive and warm to what you said?
Well, you know, as a gay man, I think we, you know, this was really nothing new because we had to have our own coming out story, right? So it was a second coming out. Not only am I a gay man, but I'm also HIV positive. And, you know, at that moment, you are very vulnerable and you have to accept the fact that, you know, you're taking a step, like Brené Brown says, you know, you are joining the arena, you are working together, you're fighting, you are living life. But you know, life, it's only worth living if you are in the arena, if you are, you know, willing to take that step. I didn't know how Marcus was going to react. His reaction, I could see in his eyes, and he actually says it in the first episode. He says, "You are the only and the first person is HIV positive." And the first thing I thought in my head was like, probably I'm not the only one, but I am the only one that is telling you that I'm HIV positive. And that's, I think, where the conversation needs to happen. You know, we came along such a, you know, we came such a long way from, you know, clearly the 80s and the early 90s, and 40 years of medical advancement, you know, made possible for a man like me, an HIV positive man, to live a life that is equal to any other person who is HIV negative. It made it possible for having the fear of contracting the virus. It made possible not to develop AIDS. It made possible for people who are HIV negative to stay HIV negative. The only thing that we haven't really moved the needle forward on is the stigma that comes with it. And that remains. And I think the only thing that can really break those walls is sharing our story. And I know that many people that will see the series and they will see the episode, they will watch the episode, might not know about my HIV positive status, and they might be surprised. And I think that's a way to change people's hearts and minds and say, you know what, I might understand that in your mind, being HIV positive is still the image that you have is still connected to the 80s, to the 90s, but science came a long way. And let me show you that an HIV positive person can be me, can be your brother, can be your sister, can be your the person that comes and fix your faucet, can be your lawyer, can be a straight, can be gay, can be white, can be black. There is no discrimination when it comes, unfortunately, to being HIV positive. And we have to take that opportunity to share our story and move the needle forward when it comes to that.
You're speaking the GLAAD language. That's what we always say, changing people's hearts and minds. That's like that's one of our most, important messages. So, thinking back on that conversation that you had with Marcus, I think you mentioned that it took you some time. I think you said a year where you really fell into a little bit of a depression, a darker space after you were initially diagnosed. Take me back to that time. What was that like? What kind of support did you have, or maybe you didn't? What was your life like back then?
You can maybe expect it to get a result, to see that big 3 letters with a plus next to it, but nothing really prepares you emotionally and mentally for that conversation, especially with someone, like a doctor, which sure you are familiar with, if you're lucky to have established that relationship, but it's still somebody that doesn't have any sort of intimate relationship with you. It was hard. It was hard. At first, I actually felt numb, and I was an emotional mess just shortly after. And I remember walking out of the doctor's office. And by the way, my doctor was extremely receptive. She was so nice, so compelling. She confirmed with me that, hey, that's okay. HIV is not that sentence anymore. We have things that can actually manage, the virus in a very efficient way. Yet again, nothing can really prepare you to deal with this in an emotional way. And so I remember walking out and feeling very numb. And then after feeling numb, I immediately felt fearful. And I remember at that moment, I picked up my phone and I called my roommate at the time, who happened to be an HIV man as well, who lived, the 80s and the 90s. And as such, I have always looked up to him for his strength, his wisdom. He became a role model for me, but also in this case, a light in the darkness of the tunnel. And so I remember calling him and say, Greg, I have to tell you something. I am HIV positive. And he say, drop anything you're doing right now and come home. We'll just sit down and hug it out and talk. I was very lucky that I had a support group, and also I was exposed to a healthy way of living, although you are an HIV positive person. And although, for example, in the case of my ex-roommate, going through the awful years of the 80s and the 90s, yet here he is, and he's as healthy as he could be. Unfortunately, that's not the common story that has of course come out of those awful years of the AIDS epidemic. I think that's exactly where the importance of sharing our story comes from. Because I'm thinking, if I didn't have Greg, who would I have had? What support I would have had without maybe having exposure to the ability of seeing an HIV positive man living a healthy life, or knowing about the programs that are available or the medicines that are available to me. And that's where I think we need to really talk about constant accessibility to programs and to medicine for free for people who recently diagnosed of HIV, so that we can immediately make sure that everyone stays, in an emotional and mental state healthy, and understand that, again, this is not that sentence anymore. We can manage it, and really not to make that virus define your life and define what you can do. I refuse that since day one. Clearly I went through, a difficult time, like you mentioned. It was a good year of depression, ups and downs, and that's normal. We have to feel our feelings, we have to understand our fear, but we also have to go back to what we know. And you know, there is really no difference in being an HIV positive man, I believe, than, you know, the color of my skin, or the hair, or the accent, or the way I talk. It's just a part of me. It's not, it doesn't become me. It's just one little part of who I am. And it's probably just a beautiful way to actually initiate a great conversation. So I think, you know, although I went through a really hard time for, you know, a few months, I think, again, I'm so thankful that the support group I had was one that allowed me to kind of move forward in a very healthy way, and made me understand that this wasn't something that marked me and made me less than what I was before. And we have to make sure that this support group is available to everyone that goes through that. I mean, HIV and AIDS, it's not a gay disease. It's, even right now, actually, it's the heterosexual group is the one that is being mostly impacted. And of course, in communities of color, poor communities that do not have access, not only to information about what being HIV positive means, but also to free drugs and treatments, and you know, mental therapy and emotional support. We just don't provide those you know, we just don't provide it.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, in the darkness of my diagnosis, and of course in the darkness of the year that I experienced after that, I always say probably was one of the most beautiful times of my life, because I was able to, you know, being reborn, right? It was like a rebirth of a new Gabe, that it's not afraid of sharing the story of you know, being an HIV positive man who, you know, is a little crazy, likes to cook, and has, you know, has tattoos all over, and that's just who I am.
I wanted to actually, you brought up cooking, because on the show, you're the man in the kitchen, you know, preparing the food for these surprise weddings. What role did your, you know, your job and your career as a chef and food have in kind of healing your own, you know, the depression that you were going through, you know, after initially getting diagnosed?
Anthony, I love you asking that, because I think that food for me has always been such a safety net. When I feel uncomfortable, I go back to cooking, and not only the cooking part of it, but also the sharing the food and sharing a meal. I believe that there is so much love involved into the act of creating a meal. You know, in this case, in the show, we are of course putting together a beautiful wedding for 150 people, and there is a certain level of vulnerability that comes with, of course, sharing who we are. Food for me has always been the glue, bringing people together, sharing against stories. And it's almost an equalizer, if you will. At the dinner table, everybody's the same. It doesn't matter if you're black, if you're white, if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're a woman, if you're a man, if you're, it just does not matter. And it's a beautiful place where we can actually build conversations. And so most of my very important moments in life happen at the dinner table. Nonetheless, coming out happened in my family at the dinner table. You know, and I think it's just a way to create, you know, cooking is a space, a safe space, where we understand that we are all here, we are all the same, you know, we are all one, and there is really no difference, and we have to create that conversation, those spaces. So for me, of course, I do it with food, you know, Jeremiah does it with design, and of course, Ty with these beautiful dresses. I think, you know, we are men, we are all men built with passion in our body, in our guts, and that passion translates into, of course, being vulnerable and sharing the stories and embracing love and everything that comes with it, you know, positive and negative.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because, you know, we don't see, you know, at GLAAD, it's very important that we work with media to, excuse me, to have inclusive and, you know, interesting and proper stories for the LGBTQ community. And we don't see enough positive stories about people living with HIV who are thriving. You know, so much of it is still the sick person in the hospital. I mean, we're seeing a lot of advances. So for you, you know, on this reality show, or not a reality show, on this, I guess it is, you know, this show, you know, since we're learning about you, what does it mean for you to be a part of changing that conversation when it comes to media and reaching people that may think, you know, living with HIV is this, and, you know, you're a part of saying, look, you can be just like anyone else, you can thrive, you can do anything you want, you can cook a great meal. You know, what does it mean for you to be a part of the changing conversation?
So this show, of course, goes out to 180 countries, right? I'm just thinking now, Los Angeles and, you know, well, United States and Los Angeles, which is such a bubble. The eagerness that I had in sharing this story, it's really rooted in wanting to give a little bit of hope, hopefully, even if it's just one or two people in the world, that, you know, to individuals that are HIV positive or they recently became HIV positive, to understand that, again, this disease does not define you. So this is actually an important moment in your life. You can decide whether letting this moment define you and say, well, this is who I am, I'm an HIV positive man, or have this opportunity to actually kind of propel you to the next stage, which is just, again, just a part of who you are. And I think the more we share it, the less of a big deal it becomes. The more we talk about it, the less of a big deal it becomes. You have no idea how many times I have friends over, and I honestly forget, you know, often that I am HIV positive, right? And I am an HIV positive man. And so once in a while in the conversation, you know, of course, as we are drinking or eating at the dinner table, I see something that, of course, reveals the fact that I'm HIV positive. And my friends, even my closest one, which again, I have even forgotten to tell them because it's not, to me, it's not a defining characteristic of who Gabriel is. They look at me and they're like, wait, hold on. Wait, are you HIV positive? And at that moment, I deeply feel the need of sharing this story. And that is a great moment. That is exactly the moment where you want to walk in and be like, yes, I am. And let me tell you, you know, why weren't you thinking that I was HIV positive? Why is such a surprise to you?
Right.
And oftentimes it's because you don't look like it. And that is the big problem, is that we do have a lot of, still community still has this idea of an HIV positive man that is tied to the 1985, 1990 pandemic. And the only way to break the barrier is to, again, share the story. This show goes out to 180 countries. I'm thinking of my motherland of Italy, that where HIV is still even a more severe stigma than in the States, and where actually getting treatment is even more difficult. You know, this, of course, it's rooted in cultural issues, in you know, religion and so forth. And what I think feeds and fuels the stigma is the silence. We cannot be silenced anymore. There are plenty of people out there who are HIV positive. We need to step up. We need to talk to people. We need to use the media that we have, you know, TV, podcasts, or even just talking to friends and family and being able and proud of showing who we are and what we have been going through. You see in the first episode, I open up and here you go, you have Marcus, a black tall man that I really think I have nothing in common with. And then all of a sudden that we both understood what grief feels like, what fear feels like, what unknown feels like. And that is where we connected as a society. So this has a bigger ripple effect than just Gabriel. I hope that this has a ripple effect on society and the fact that we are connected all together and we have to share our stories.
Yeah, it's very interesting as I sit here and talk to you. You know, GLAAD in 1985 was created to combat the negative headlines about HIV and AIDS that were coming out of New York City, because there was so much misinformation and negative headlines, and that was the birth basically of GLAAD.
So and Anthony, I am so thankful for organizations like truly like yours that portray a healthy understanding of what, for example, being an HIV positive man looks like, or the LGBTQ plus community. It's important that we do the work, and the work also starts individually. So again, maybe not everybody has, you know, the availability of being on a show or have a podcast, but we all are connected in our little community. And so let's start from that step. Let's start opening up and not being afraid of that.
Have you know, I was just thinking, this show is from the creators of Queer Eye. Jonathan Van Ness on that show also has been extremely vocal and just an amazing voice to get conversations and awareness for people living with HIV. I'm just curious, have you had any time, or have you guys ever met or had any conversations? Because, you know, you're both kind of in that same world now. You know, in the same, you're experts on a
I know.
Netflix,
We're like 3 degrees of separation here. You know, his coming out as HIV positive member in the book was a surprise to me, as it was to everybody else. And it was something that it was so so welcoming in my life. I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need. Another, I mean, come on, he's an idol. You know, people follow him, and and you know, they look up to him. His lack of fear in showing who he is and who he wants to be without any sort of restraints, and it's something that I look. And so knowing that it was, you know, his time to actually opening up about his status made even my coming out story a little bit easier. You know, I was like, all right, great. You know, I'm not alone. We are not alone. And I know, listen, I know that there are so many others out there that if they want, they can step up and do it. So I think this is the time. There is a momentum. Let's just ride it. You know, of course, we look forward to kind of as one voice to congregate and just like propel the message that being HIV positive is not a death sentence, that it is possible to get to transmission zero, that we have to get tested, that everybody that has sex should be on PrEP, and everybody who hasn't tested should go get tested so that you can get treatment. And there are very simple, you know, steps. And I think we have to keep talking about it.
100%. And, you know, that is such a top priority for GLAAD as we, you know, continue and look into the future ahead. So it's been
Thank you, Anthony.
Such a pleasure to talk to you, and to, you know, I really appreciate you being so candid and being so honest, because like you said, I think the opportunity for you to reach people and to inspire them and to change hearts and minds, just like you said, and to get them to understand that, you know, it's totally okay to be living with HIV, and you can be thriving, you can be cooking great meals like you.
You can do, listen, I would have not expected to be on a show. And so I was like, you know what, listen, this is the time. If there is one time I'm gonna come out as HIV positive person, let me use this medium so that I can make the most impact on the perception of HIV positive people in the world. And so I agree with you. I hope that people will watch this and they will understand that, again, stigmas, it's something that's connected to fear, to silence. And it's right now, it's not the time for that. We need to speak up. We need to work together.
Amazing. And I could not agree with you more. Well, just a reminder, everyone out there, that the show is Say I Do. It's on Netflix. It's available to stream right now. And you'll see Gabe right here, and also Jeremiah and Ty. It's
amazing.
Yes.
Get your clinics ready, because it's a, you know, it's an emotional show, but hopefully one that will bring people together, and it will really, it's rooted in love. What's not to love about love? There you go.
Absolutely. All right. It's been such a pleasure, and hopefully in person, I'll get to see you at some point soon. So hang in, and maybe we can cook together at some point. I would love that.
That would be beautiful. You'll do the dishes, I'll cook.
Okay, deal.
Thank you
so much.
Have a good night.
You too.